let's talk about how to finish your book. Where are you guys at in terms of where are you at in your books? So are you first draft? Are you almost done with the first draft? Or do you have a first draft and you're at the, is this even a good book phase? Are you in the line by line editing phase? Are you in the, it's pretty much done, but I just can't let it go and I still think that it could be better somehow, so I don't give it up? First phase, right? There's all these different phases. And then you have the phase of it's basically done. Yeah, paralysis by analysis. But yeah, that's pretty much the overall phase that most authors are in. Almost done, pretty much done. And then it's basically done. I just need to set it up. Okay, cool, amazing. So here's basically what you're going to do. This is so firstly, the reason why you're not done with your book is here's the good and bad news. The good and bad news is that it's your fault. Okay. So I'm a very strong believer in extreme ownership. If you guys have read Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership, this isn't a bad thing. It should be empowering, but just know that it's in your hands. So you may already know that, but just owning it, really owning it, is very important. And once this is, if you guys have ever read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, the first chapter is belief, right? And the reason why it's belief is because if you don't believe, then you're not going to be able to get to whatever your goal is. And so you got to believe and you got to own it that I can do this and I will do this. So that's first, it's the psychology. If you are struggling with this, I would read Stephen Pressfield. Oh, actually, have you guys seen? I added another. We started doing some book. You guys should read these. Watch these. These are lessons on different books. And this one, The War of Art. You guys should click on this. We're adding all sorts of cool things. We're going to add a video at some point every day, but right now we'll add one probably every week or so. And then these are all the old lessons. I'm going to add cool thumbnails for them. You can see. Anyways, getting back to the lesson here. So the Stephen Pressfield is a great person to read, or you can watch that video that explains, he calls it resistance, right? And you have this resistance to get to the next step. So once you say, okay, I'm going to take ownership, I'm going to do it. And usually the reason why you end up doing it is because of a big why. It usually isn't about yourself, but it's about something that you want to impart. The reason that this book exists, whether it's to help your family, whether it's to make some money, whether it's to live a life of purpose, to have the readers' lives change, whatever, even if it's just to entertain people, make a little side hustle, whatever it may be, whatever your big why is, you got to remind yourself of that big why to be able to just sit your butt in the chair. Then, has anyone read Atomic Habits by James Clear? It's the best-selling book, really, of the last 5 years in nonfiction, for sure. But Atomic Habits, he essentially says that the first thing that you need to do is you need to understand that your environment and the triggers and making something really easy is the best way to make a habit stick, right? So if you habitualize something and you make it difficult where you think, oh, I have to sit down and write a masterpiece, or I have to write a whole chapter, or whatever it may be, then you're sort of psyching yourself out. So you don't want to psych yourself out. So this is why atomic habits, right? You want to make them bite-sized, right? Small habits, and that will have a big effect. And you want to set yourself up where you say, okay, every day at this time, I'm going to work on my book. And you want to stick to it and say, protect it, say no to everyone else. And even if it's just 30 minutes, the idea is to go into a deep work session. Don't have your phone in the other room. Don't be distracted, and understand what your goal of is that day, right? In the Academy lessons, please enable full screen mode. I think we did. Am I crazy? Someone just said this. Yeah, full screen is down here. We changed full screen for all of them, I think. But anyways, so don't get distracted. Focus and make sure that you have one particular goal for that day. And it could be write the next paragraph. It could be outline the next chapter. It could be come up with backstory for a character. It could be find an anecdote for this part of the nonfiction book, whatever it may be. Okay. But just be particular about what your goal is, because otherwise you end up kind of just meandering around in circles and then not accomplishing something. And then that becomes a vicious cycle, because if you don't accomplish the thing that you want to accomplish, even if it's a shitty first draft, then you feel like, oh, well, every time I sit down, I don't really do anything worthwhile and I don't even accomplish anything. So why would I even sit down? And then you end up going into this spiral. And people do this when they're on diets, where they're good 90% of the time, and then they have a cheat meal, and then it turns into a cheat weekend, and then it turns into a cheat week, and then it sort of spirals. And so it's okay, but the same is true for a positive. There's this idea of a virtuous cycle, right? There's a new book called The Winner Effect that's going crazy on social media right now, and that's the entire book essentially, is that the people that win will win more. And why will they win more? It's because they get in the habit of winning, and then they believe in themselves and they trust themselves, and then because they trust themselves, they'll sit down and do the work more, and they're riskier because they think they're going to win, and then it becomes just this compounding effect. So the same thing applies to your book. Now, listen, we're going to get into, I'll screen share and we'll talk about how to outline and write things word for word and finish your book. But it's just know that 90% of the reason why you're not finished is not, if you're just starting, you're not doing anything wrong. But what I'm saying is the reason why you would not finish as fast as you could is mostly mental, and transitioning that mental into physical action and habits is ultimately what's going to make you succeed. Okay. So with that said, with the mindset part of it and the habit part of it out of the way, the other big thing that's going to hold you back is your own ego. Has anyone ever heard the story of or the fable, I guess, of the pottery class or the pottery professor? Does anyone know that? Yeah. Does anyone not know what it is? I'll give you the quick version. So there's a class and they start the semester, and it's a pottery class, and the professor puts the class into half, 50% on one side and 50% on the other side. And he says, okay, the A part of a class, A and B, you guys will be graded based on one piece of pottery. So you have all semester to create one piece of pottery. The other side, you are going to be judged based on quantity. So I actually don't even care about your quality. You can create 50 pieces of really bad pottery, but as long as you produce 50 pieces of pottery, you'll get an A in the class. So you have one that's being judged based on the one quality and the other based on quantity. And at the end of the semester, they have a show and there's a blind judging. And which side do you think had the best pieces of pottery? The ones who took all semester on one and polish, or the ones who did quantity, 50. De Niro says 50, quantity, Gavin, 50, yeah. So you guys are right. Your intuition, though, at least my intuition, maybe this isn't your intuition, but my intuition was, well, if I spend 4 months on one thing, it's going to be better. That's your intuition. But another way to think about it is that in order to get to the next step, you have to iterate and learn. Have you guys ever heard, there's a famous anecdote of, if you have marshmallows and spaghetti sticks and you try to build a tower as high as you can, the shorter the time period, if you group different groups, usually children win the assignment compared to even CEOs or lawyers or engineers or architects. And the reason for that is they just get started. They don't think about it. They don't plan it. They just go. Now, over time, an engineer, of course, is going to beat children. But the idea is that you have to be okay with shitty first drafts. You have to be okay with it not being perfect. You have to be okay with this book not being very good. That's the real rub. You have to be okay with this book not being very good. And then you have to be okay with the next one not being that good. And then the next one not being that good. I think, personally, one of my favorite books of all time, and I would argue maybe top 5 greatest American novels, is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I don't know if you guys have ever read it, but it's his magnum opus. And he wrote a journal while he was writing it. And it's really, you can buy it on Amazon. It's an incredible book. And they publish his journal postmortem. And it's him describing his process of writing East of Eden. And the beginning of it, this is after, by the way, he had written The Pearl, he had written The Red Pony, he had written Of Mice and Men, all of his famous works, right? And he was a famous, rich, well-respected writer while he was alive. Okay, so he was not like Fitzgerald, for example, who didn't make a lot of money until after he died, or Van Gogh, for example, only sold one painting his entire life. There's stories of these tortured artists that didn't make any money, but Steinbeck was not one of those. Steinbeck was very famous and very successful while he was alive. And he had already won the Pulitzer Prize. He was very successful. And he said in the beginning of this journal, everything else I have written my entire life, and he was in his 60s or 70s at the time, he said was practice for this novel. Just imagine that. Imagine being a professional writer for 30 years, being very successful, and thinking that everything that you wrote in the past wasn't good enough and it was just practice for the next one. Okay. So that, I don't mean that to, because there's no such thing as good, right? Good is in the eye of the reader, essentially. Some of the best-selling books in the world are not technically sentence by sentence, literarily very good, but they're still good at what their job is to do, which is to entertain and to keep people reading. So good, that's not my point. Good is subjective. But the idea is that whatever your goal is, you are going to necessarily look back on things that you wrote in the past. And if you are improving, you're going to think it's not very good. And that's okay. And so you have to accept the fact in advance that what you're writing is just a practice for the next one. And if you have that mindset, it's actually freeing. It takes the anxiety, it takes the pressure off. And especially with AI and with whether it's with us or if it's easier to find editors these days, it's easier to get side hustles, it's easier to work from home. It's actually easier than it's ever been in the history of the world to make a living as a writer. You used to have to be one of the 6 publishers or pay for your own printing, but now you have Amazon and you have Kindle, and you can find a audiobook recorder on a bunch of platforms. It's really easier than it's ever been, ever. And so that's a good thing. That means that you just need to go out in the world and make it happen. And it's okay if it takes 3 books or 4 books or 5 books or 6 books, or it's okay if you get a first draft done and then you send it to an editor, or we help you edit it, or you ask the writing editor app and it gives you a lot of advice. And it's sort of emotionally difficult to deal with that. Does that make sense? So you have to calm your ego down and realize you have to have beginner's mind that everything is just practice for the next one. Okay. So belief that you can do it, that's part of the mindset. Habits of showing up every day, Stephen King once said he only writes when he's inspired, but he's inspired every day at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so having the habits that are necessary to do it, and then understanding that everything that you do is just practice for the next. So this is going to get you 90% of the way. And then after that is just doing the work every day. That's the next most important task. So this idea of, has everyone ever heard of the domino effect? So the domino effect means, and this is based on physics, if you have a domino or something the equivalent of a domino and you push it over, it can knock down a domino that's 50% taller than it. So what ends up happening is that you can see the compound effect gets pretty crazy, because 50% of 50% and 50%, it ends up, I forget the exact number, but it's quicker than you would think. At 40 or something dominoes from an inch could knock down the Empire State Building. And so meaning that, but here's the problem, is that if you have the dominoes going and then you have one of them that's turned to an angle and isn't the next domino, not knocking down the right domino, then you can go all off track. And so this is why staying organized and not being emotional and thinking of your book based on how you feel, but saying, no, I'm going to focus my attention on the next paragraph or the next chapter, or what do I need to do? And then if you do that every single day, you can chunk down your tasks into smaller pieces, but over time you will get a lot more done, right? So let's say, for example, you wanted to write a 80,000 word novel, which is almost 300 pages, depending on the typeset, right? So if you divide that by 365 days, then that's, you guys can see, and you can't see it, 219 words per day. An 80,000 word novel is not a novella, it's a proper novel. It's not David Foster Wallace, but it's pretty large. And can you guys write enough to know what 200 words is? 200 words is nothing. It's nothing. I could WhatsApp someone 200 words in the next 5 minutes. It's shockingly little writing. So if you say, yeah, it's literally a few sentences. Exactly. It's paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs. It's shockingly few words. In fact, if you're a copywriter and they say, oh, keep it under 200 words. So sometimes it's difficult to write. Yeah. It's some people says, 5,000 words in a day. 5,000 words is pretty much the max for me. And then I usually have to take the day off the next day. 5,000 words will take a lot of my brain power, but that's, yeah, that's sort of an upper limit for me. But 200 is nothing. And so the idea is that you could write, think about that. Imagine your career, imagine 20 years in the future. And you say, oh yeah, I published 20 books in the last 20 years. 20 books in the last 20 years is 200 words a day. I used to think Ryan Holiday, do you guys know Ryan Holiday? The obstacle is the way, ego is the enemy, stillness is the key. He's the Daily Stoic. He's a really prolific writer. He talks about stoicism, but he comes out with a book every year. He very metronomic, comes out with a book every single year. And I used to think when I was younger and I was an amateur writer, I used to think, wow, this is crazy. I can't believe he writes a book a year. But his books are actually quite short and they're pretty formulaic the way that he outlines them. And they're probably 35,000, 4,000 words is my guess. So to write a book a day, and he has professional editors that help him, he only really has to write 100 words a day. So I'm saying this to calm your nerves a bit when if you feel like it's overwhelming to finish the book. It's really not. You just have to be habitual about it and then do the next most important thing. Okay. So let's get into the meat of the lesson. So we have, but this is not a joke. Mindset for me is not woo or whatever. It's because I can give you the answer on a silver platter. But if you don't have the right structure and the way to deal with it emotionally and psychologically, and it's just never going to get done. So I needed to talk about that for a little bit. Okay. So big idea is the first thing. Why does this book exist, essentially? Then you do plot and structure. That's the next step. Then you do chapter by chapter outline. You don't have to have every single chapter, but most of them. What is the structure? This is important for fiction and nonfiction. First draft. So you just go through it and finish a first draft. Then you do an edit and publish and marketing. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about, to this point, we're not going to talk about publishing and marketing. Okay. So big idea. Why does this book exist? What do I want to say and to whom? And this applies to novels as well, right? So what's the theme of the novel essentially? And this shouldn't take too long. If you have, if you're not sure about this, you can come up with, we have story generator. This is pretty cool. Let me put this input. I want to write a novel that takes place in Nebraska about death and overcoming grief. It should be written in the style of Hemingway and have a love story. Okay. And then it came up with a book title, explanation, book description, genre, tone and style, protagonist, antagonist, setting and time period, supporting characters, theme and big idea, key plot points, etc. Right. So we built some apps to help you with this big idea. And then once you have the big idea and the themes, then you're going to want to get into the nitty-gritty details. Okay. So what are the characters? Essentially, you always want a protagonist and antagonist, maybe a love story. Do you guys know the idea of like allies? Not to get too complicated, but you have essentially, there's always groups. So the protagonist has people that are essentially helping them. And then you have the antagonist, people that are helping them. And then you have the antagonist of the world, right? And the conflict between these is essentially where you get the book, right? So setting, basically community, antagonism, group, and then the actual people that are helping. The setting is important, obviously, for a number of reasons. It's genre specific, but usually the setting is some sort of antagonist for the protagonist goal. And then you want the antagonist goal and the protagonist goal to be in opposition. There's got to be some climax and there's got to be some resolution. If you're writing nonfiction, essentially the climax is what do you want them to learn, right? And then you're making an argument. You got to nonfiction. You have to imagine like you're the best professor, the best lecturer. Have you ever listened to a lecture and you thought, wow, this is really engaging. This is sort of why Jordan Peterson became famous. He's just a great lecturer, right? And not to get into the politics of it, but he's a good storyteller. He's a good lecturer. He's a good orator, if you will. And so that's why he's a professor, and now he's this super world famous person. And Steven Pinker is sort of similar, or Jonathon Haidt. These are all really famous authors, but they started as professors. And so whenever you're writing a nonfiction book, you want to imagine you're giving a TED Talk. You imagine that you're giving a lecture. And in order to make people interested, you have to make your point. You are making a point, but you're making a point through these mini stories. You're making a point through case studies, statistics. You're basically essentially making an argument, right? So once you have all that down, does anyone get stuck here? If you guys get stuck here, you guys use these apps, okay? There's like the generators, the story generator, the outline wizard for nonfiction, big idea generator. This one will give you big ideas for nonfiction. novels. We're going to create more different, never satisfied with my characters. Okay. That's an interesting, yeah. So sometimes when you're not satisfied with your characters, just using this as a case study, I know that everyone has a different thing that holds them up. A lot of times this isn't particular to you, but a lot of times when people have a problem with their characters is because you think that you're going to think your way out of it. Okay. And this is just a side lesson in life, is that usually the answer is on the other side of action. And so whenever you have a character, you're not satisfied with that character. It's not what they're wearing. It's not their physical description. It's not something from their past. It's usually not going to come in your own brain. What you have to do is decide what are their core values, right? Any character. Who am I at my core? What do I believe in? And there's going to be do they care about money? Do they care about status? Do they care about health? Do they care about their family? Do they care about sex? Do they care about power? Do they care about forgiveness? What are their core values? And then oppositely, not necessarily oppositely, but what are their vices? What are the things that hold them back? And this is often just a few things. It's the same for you when people would write, maybe if one of your friends or your family wrote something about you, what would they say? They would probably have maybe 4 adjectives, 5 adjectives. They would imagine your funeral. They would say, oh, he's always really friendly and was willing to give a helping hand and was really good mechanically. He was like a really good builder and really loved his wife, but he could drink, right? It's 4 things maybe. And so that is your base of a character. And then what you do is you put them in really precarious situations. So how you find who your character is through action, because there's how many people do you say a bunch of things? Oh, I'm this, I'm that, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, and we do it to ourselves as well. But at the end of the day, who you are is what you do. Who you are is what you do, essentially. It's not what you say. And so what you want to do is you want to take these characters that have these core values and these core desires and then put them in precarious situations and just try to write them out of it. What would they do? And what would they do in these different situations? And that's where you're going to find rounded characters. Rounded characters come from conflict, not from descriptions. So anyways, that was just a little side tangent. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone else. Yeah, don't get bogged down in the larger picture. Not when it comes down to characters, right? Is it larger picture, even the language that you're using, larger picture. I know you're trying to communicate in a group chat, but larger picture, what does that mean? So the idea is being very particular about your problem, right? So, I'm not satisfied with my protagonist. Well, why? Why am I not satisfied with my protagonist? Well, because, and always start at the top. Is it because this protagonist doesn't align with the goal of this book? Is it because I don't even really know why I'm writing this book? Is there not a point to this book? Well, then you're going to always have this conflict because the character is nebulous and who cares? Because you're not confining yourself, essentially, right? If you think about it's like one of those Russian dolls. Writing a book is like a Russian doll or a fractal, if you will. And it always starts, the base is always why does this book exist? I'm not joking. This isn't I didn't put this in the beginning because I'm trying to be emotional or spiritual or rah. You're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. I'm not trying to be inspirational. My point is that actually think about it. What is the point of this book? And and essentially you're going to put your protagonist through a series of trials, which are just decision points that they have to make decisions that at the end they will learn this lesson. And as a result, so too will the reader learn this lesson. And we remember stories much better than we remember facts. And so that's why stories are so powerful. They're like memes, right? It's funny, Naval Ravikant, I keep on quoting him, but it's the best book I've read in probably 10 years, is The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. And he talks about the 4 types of leverage when you're, from a business owner perspective, it's the 4 types of leverage. And he says there's obviously capital, money. You can leverage money. You can leverage other people, essentially humans, employees. You can leverage software and you can leverage media. But I think that there's actually a 5th, which is ideas. The thing that has the most levers, the most Archimedes lever of anything is an idea. It's the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. The Almanac. Yeah, it looks like this. You guys can see it. I've read it 3 or 4 times at this point. It's incredible. Okay. So my point is that the idea is going to inform everything. That's why you're writing the book. And it's obvious in nonfiction, right? What argument am I trying to make here in my nonfiction book? I'm trying to teach about leadership or how to quit smoking or the 10 steps to having a great vacation in Barcelona. It doesn't matter what it is, but there's a point of the book. essentially, right? And then the characters and the stories that you choose are relative to that point. I mean, I'll even the research assistant. This is kind of interesting way to think about it, right? So the a book title, then the book description. What's the book? And then what information do you need? Let's say I need a true story from history, right? The reason why we say what's the context? Why do you need this information? What point are they trying to make? How will this piece of information drive your story or point forward? The reason why we're asking this, and the reason why the application needs this information is because a story is irrelevant without a context for why we're telling the story. Does that make sense? So that's the same. That's the same with as you're writing. Okay. So the chapter by chapter, you guys, if you guys want chapter by chapter, I'm not going to go through it super detailed, but go to here, and nope, that's not it. Go how to outline a nonfiction book, and then how to outline. I titled this incorrectly. Anyways, one of these is fiction. Okay, I gotta go change that. But one of them is fiction, one of them is nonfiction. Okay, so you can watch that. Essentially, you want to have a chapter by chapter outline, right? And then this is actually very simple. First draft. How do you do the first draft? Butt in chair. Sometimes I butt in chair, guys. You gotta do it. Okay, that's how you write the first draft. I know that sounds simple, but it's the truth. And then also, guys, let's say we have a chapter outline. Okay, let's say writer nonfiction. Okay, so let's say we have a chapter outline. I have a chapter outline for my book. It's about how to team as an executive in Europe. The problem that American executives have is that they are sometimes culturally unaware. In this chapter, let's talk about Italy specifically. The outline should be true story of an American that built a company in Italy. Tell it in a compelling way to what can we learn from this story. Write an entire section about what customs are necessary in Italy. Finish with a how to where you give specific advice. I like Malcolm Gladwell, use his style and also use quotes from other business books to make your point. Okay, so let's just see what it does there. So this is, you would have a better outline than this, but I'm showing you how simple it is, right? Suggest sample, make sure it's true. So let's say I wanted the first draft of this chapter. Okay, Felix, email support at, you can go to book 9. Okay, so basically this just wrote a chapter, and how long did this take? So this didn't take very long, right, guys? I'm gonna copy and paste this, paste. Okay, I'm gonna delete this section because it was a duplicate. I'm gonna delete the prompts. I think I didn't do the first part of it. Oh no, I did. Hang on. Sorry. Okay. So there we go. What's the say chapter 4, leadership abroad? I just made that up. Italy. So let's say this is a book, a nonfiction book about being a leader abroad and how to deal with it in different customs of different countries. Right? And let's say that was chapter 4. So, well, you can do spelling, grammar. Hang on one second. Word count. Yeah, 923 words. Okay. So let's say you did a 20-page book. You'd have a 20,000 word book right there. You could do this, as you can see, and I'll teach you how to do this, but you can get it. This is a decent first draft. Okay. And it starts with a story, right? And then it has, what can we learn from it? And then it's got, these are just general customs. And then here's the application to your life, right? This is super sensible for chapter. Okay. So then you do this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. If you wanted to do the same thing, we have one for fiction, which is trained in storytelling and dialogue. Right? But the idea is that you just need, whether you sit the butt in the chair with yourself or you sit your butt in the chair with AI and you do it in 5 hours, at the end of the day, you're going to want to have 100, 200 page book. Okay. Then the next thing that you're going to want to do in order, this is very important, is that you first, before you start talking about line by line edits, is you want to read through the whole thing and then realize and go, whether it's yourself or we're adding an app that's you're going to be able to upload your PDF and then it's going to give you these edits, but just give us probably one more week and we'll have it ready. But does this work? Is there parts that are boring? Are there, let's say in this example, are there countries that seem sort of irrelevant? Does it need more setup? Is the middle boring? Just think about every chapter in 2 sentences, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and this happens, right? And if it feels like that, and then it's probably bad, just as a side note here. If something happens and then it causes the next thing, okay, and therefore absolutely there was no way around it, this had to happen, okay, then you're onto something. So ask yourself, is the next thing that happened feeling inevitable? Yeah, well, because this was revealed, or this decision was made, or they moved to this area, or there's not very many things that can happen, right? And every chapter there should be new information that changes the protagonist's goal in some way, either moves them towards it or away from it, or they made a decision, which is an action that changes the protagonist's goal. Okay. So it's either decision or a new piece of information or a change of setting, which causes new rules or new characters, which changes the protagonist's goal. And by goal, I don't mean that they actually change their goal. I mean like their relationship to their goal, right? The how. So if you're writing a story and one of these 3 things doesn't happen in the chapter, it can be cut, essentially. Therefore, or you could say chapter 1, therefore chapter 2. Or another way to think about it is chapter 2 because of chapter 1. If you can't write it in that way, and it's just, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, it's going to be boring. Okay. Same thing for a nonfiction book. Nonfiction books is essentially, the chapter 2 is the entire book in one chapter. Then chapter 3 is the premise of the big idea. Is essentially the big idea. Then chapter 4 through 7 is a premise with arguments. Chapter 8 through 12 is a premise with arguments. And then that continues until conclusion. So essentially you're saying, this is my thesis. Right. And then you're saying, here's all the reasons why I'm right. It's just almost like an academic paper, but it's just written in a way. I don't know if you guys have ever taken a philosophy class or like a logic class. That's all a nonfiction book is. A nonfiction book is an argument. They're saying, this is how the world works, and this is how we improve it in whatever way. And then the rest of the chapters are just arguing on behalf of that thesis, essentially. Right. So if a chapter isn't either making a point, is not a premise, or it's not answering an objection, it's unnecessary. Does that make sense? So that's where you do the plot edit. Okay. Then once you have all of that down, then you can start changing the stories, right? So what needs to happen in this chapter is that it's revealed that the side character's mom is actually never dead. Okay. And so that's the big reveal of the chapter. Now, if that's the only thing that has to happen in that chapter, every other part of the chapter is sort of unnecessary. And therefore, that's valuable, is you can change whatever you want. So you can make it in a cafe, you could make them in a spaceship, you could make them talking on the phone. It doesn't really matter. You can do it however you want. And so you might want to change the scene, or because there's only that one thing that happens in the chapter that actually matters. And so you can change, as long as that one thing matters, you can change the scenery around it to make it more interesting, right? Then once you've done that for every single chapter, now you have a book that works. Okay. Have you ever heard from an editor, this doesn't work? Well, it doesn't work because there's parts of it that are either missing, or there are parts of it that are not causal, or there's parts of it that they're lacking, they're not interesting, essentially. Okay. So once you have that, then you go into sentence by sentence. And the best way that obviously you have to have grammar, it's fine, but sentence by sentence really is, I argue that there's no really right answer except for whatever's closest to your voice. So sentence by sentence is go to here and how to find your voice. Watch this one. And I talk about how to find your voice, because sentence by sentence for Jack Kerouac is very different than sentence by sentence for Toni Morrison. Right? They're so different, you can't even imagine. So how could you say that a sentence is better or worse? A sentence is better if it's in your voice or in the voice of the character more deeply, and if it says what you're trying to say more precisely, which doesn't necessarily mean shorter, by the way. I disagree with that. I'm just skipping to advanced. For amateur writers, usually want to shorten things. But if you have a really strong voice and you're trying to say, don't listen to anyone that says it should be shorter, honestly. It better be good, but doesn't have to be shorter. And then grammar and then print ready. These I wouldn't worry about too much because there's just softwares that will do this for you. And print ready is just, I'll make a lesson on that. I don't want to talk about that too much, but hopefully that was helpful, guys.